degree in medieval history. Very useful, I know, which is why I love this job. So, my brother and I are going to do a historical discussion of what in the world happened to France. I will be doing Charlemagne, and my fine brother Evan will follow up with a piece on Louis XIV. These are adapted by an essayist from the 50s by the name of Will Covey, who nobody has ever heard of, but he is my favorite historian. He's really, really funny, and everything is true, and he's just such a jerk the entire time that he is my favorite writer, even after reading a bunch of actual historians for 4 years, for real. So, Charlemagne. Charlemagne the Great, Charles the Great, lived way back in the Dark Ages when people were not very bright. They have been getting brighter and brighter ever since, until we are like we are today. Charlie, as they called him at home, was born in 742, the son of Pippin the Short and Bertha of the Big Foot, an outstanding girl of the period. There is not much dealing with his infancy and boyhood. Pippin, the father, was mayor of the palace for Childeric the Brainless, one of the Merovingian, or do-nothing kings of the Franks, who did nothing but sit around all day twiddling their mistresses and drinking mead. Sometimes, for a change, they would get up and assassinate their grandmothers in all sorts of fun manners, like tying all 4 of her limbs to 4 horses and cracking a whip and yelling, "Get up!" Anything for a good time. As he was fed up with this total nonsense, Pippin threw Childeric out of the palace and made himself king of the Franks in 752. He died in 768, leaving his title jointly to Charles and to Charlemagne, a younger son who soon died suddenly, even though he'd never been sick a day in his life. By this time, Charles was 29, and billed as almost too good to be true. He was so wonderful as a soldier, statesman, moralist, reformer, and all-around great guy, it would be absolutely horrid to suggest that anything had been suspicious about Charlemagne's death. The same goes for the sad passing of Charlemagne's wife and 2 sons when their mother tried to make trouble. It seemed to run in the family. The most I will say is I feel a little uneasy about it. So there he was, sole king of the Franks, a large Germanic tribe subsisting mostly on sausages and beer. The Franks had all been German at first, but some of them had taken to eating frogs' legs and snails and gradually turning into Frenchmen, only they didn't know it yet. Most historians say that Charlemagne was neither French nor German. He was Frankish, but that's wrong. He was German. Charlemagne's strong point was morals. He was so moral that some people thought he was only fooling. He was so good and so obviously great that he was crowned Emperor of the Romans by Pope Leo III on Christmas Day, 800. Thus becoming, at least on paper, the Holy Roman Emperor, which is quite a feat considering he had neither an empire, nor was very holy, nor was Roman. He announced that he had never sought the honor for 1 minute, did not see it coming, and was very much surprised at the whole thing. He just looked up and felt a crown tickling his brow and said, "Whew, look at that. Suddenly I'm the emperor." And who are you to call him an old barefaced liar when everyone knows he had a long beard? Just because he brought the right tie to the occasion doesn't mean the story didn't go the way he said it did. And also, he really, really had a long beard. The emperor looked wonderful in his new clothing, and the Caliph of Baghdad sent him an elephant named Abul Abbas as a token of his success. And that's the trouble with success, people keep sending you elephants. As a legislator, Charlemagne was untiring. He held 2 assemblies every year, one in the spring to pass new laws and one in the fall to repeal them. He wished justice and right to prevail along all classes. He often spoke of the widow and the orphan and the poor, and how the wrong persons should not be punished as often occurred. He was a big advocate of fair justice, so he very much enjoyed trial by ordeal, according to which those accused of anything had to plunge their arms elbow deep into a barrel of hot pitch to see how they liked it. And if they managed to tell the truth while their arms were in hot pitch, then they must be telling the truth. It was a little difficult to do, obviously, but if you interviewed the right officials, the pitch would only be lukewarm. The poor never got wise to this, which is why you can't do much for them. Apparently they're never in with the right people. Editorial note, I don't like that part of his. One of his admirers has called him the greatest intellect of the Middle Ages. Well, hardly that, but he did try to learn how to read. He mastered elementary reading. He was never able to write more than his name. He insisted that it was from his years and years of fighting. His palm had been malformed by years of holding the sword that he couldn't adjust itself to the pen. The problem was not in his hands. As we all know, his height was 7 times the length of his foot, but we aren't quite sure what that was. If he took after big-footed Bertha in this account, he would have been 8 or 9 feet tall, which is doubtful. He was, though, a natural-born husband and father. He had 4 or 5 wives, never more than 2 at a time, and he was very good to all of them, and then he had 5 or 6 concubines on the side for good measure. If there was one thing he loved, it was a honeymoon. I figure that Desideridata, Hildegard, Fastrada, and Luitgard were legal, and Maltegard, Gerspinda, Regina, and Adelaide were not. I don't count Ermentrude, his first love. He was only practicing then. Among the children were several daughters who were kept at home and not allowed to marry. This was a good way to keep your family line going. At least 8 of his sons and daughters were legitimate. He recognized 10 others as his own, a fact which speaks well for his generosity and spirit of fair play. I do think that people who confess to having 10 illegitimate children probably have more. He waged 54 wars during the 43 years of his reign. His empire became greater with each one until it reached a really ridiculous size, stretching from the North Sea to the Mediterranean, from the Atlantic to goodness knows where else. He died of a severe cold in 814 and was buried, and it is not true that his beard grew so big that it split his casket open after his death. As we learn in the books, in conclusion, Charlemagne remade Europe practically single-handed, changing it from a mere mess of hostile tribes and governments to an organized, unified whole. He brought culture, religion, and civilization in general to all and sundry, and historians agree that he laid the foundations of a just and lasting peace for Europe. What won't they think of next?